For being here. We're going to just, I think, wait a couple more minutes so that our team can shuttle a few more people to fill these seats, because we do have a lot of people in the hall. All right. Yes, whoever's doing the music is on it. It's coming up. It's going down. Amazing. It's good. We paid good money for this. Yeah. I would say now, like by 5 minutes. Like everything goes back by 5-ish minutes. Yeah, so I'm sorry that that complicates your job a little bit. Okay, all right. I'm sure you can handle it. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. So I want to see if Stacy is here. Is Stacy here? I don't see you. Okay, she is. Okay. Is she gonna? Okay. All right. We're just gonna wait a couple more minutes, but thanks for your patience. All right. I think we're going to get started, and we will certainly see more people filtering in as the day goes on. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing really well. It's so good to see all of you. My name is Suzanne Pierre. You can call me Sue. I am the founder and executive director of the Critical Ecology Lab, which is the organization that hosts this gathering annually for the last 2 years, now 3. And Afro Futures is a kind of love letter that we have been writing to the Bay Area for years. We have not been writing the same letter every time. It's grown, it's changed, and it's been responsive to what we've learned about what the community needs. As an organization, the Critical Ecology Lab is first and foremost a research operation. But what is it that we research? I get asked this all the time. What we're really researching is the way that humanity, our values, our beliefs, the systems that we create, have actually shaped the earth itself. And many of us, which this will surprise no one, I think, in this room, many of us have been the collateral damage of that shaping and that making. And the problem is that that damage is not equal. It is felt most heavily by the communities that have been neglected, marginalized, and disenfranchised by our society. And that's not by accident. We know that there is a method to the madness that we are experiencing. And so for the last 2 years, and really more, because this has been in the making for several more years, we've been working to design a space where the people with expertise about how and why the environment is changing, especially people who have come from these backgrounds of marginalization and oppression, can be in direct community, in direct contact with everyone else who's living through it. And so we want to completely destroy the walls between the people who understand the climate science jargon and the ecological data jargon and bring them into conversation with people who are designing new technologies to help us cope in the face of climate catastrophe. We want to bring them into conversation with the theorists who have been applying feminist lenses and liberation theory to the humanities for many years, so that all of these folks can actually come to the same table and imagine what a solution really looks like. And again, this will surprise no one in this room, I think, but that can only happen if we are in community with everyone else, the people that we are accountable to and live with. And so Afro Futures is a space specifically to allow us to vision. So this year, we've focused our program even more than previous years, and we are really tackling explicitly some of the most important questions of our time. How climate change and the disasters that are ensuing intersect directly with questions of democracy, of technology and the development of AI, and cooperative economic futures. These issues really shape our well-being, right? How we will make it through this time. And I think popular media does not showcase that these are climate issues. And so today, with several hours ahead of us, we are going to hear from experts who are Black women scholars, designers, innovators who are going to bring their expertise here to this stage and share with you how they are enacting Afro Futures in their work. We are going to honor them for the time that they've given us today, and then we're going to take our time together in practice, in communities of practice, where we will share in workshops different ways of approaching these issues, and we'll actually gain some tactical skills. So, with that being said, I want to introduce our first speaker. Ariana is a technologist. She is a learning designer and a children's author, investigating the ways that technology can actually foster playful learning experiences that bridge communities and cultures. She is currently a teacher at the Stanford Design School, or the D School, where she helps students and educators to utilize emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, and she shapes conversations around its ethical implications on humans and the natural world. She is a Wayfinder awardee recipient from the National Geographic Society. That's actually how we met. She is really an intrepid thinker who cuts across many disciplines, I would say, but has the heart of a designer and an exceptional thinker. So thank you so much, Ariam, for being here with us, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Sue, for that wonderful introduction. It is really such an honor to be in this room full of so many people who care deeply about education, technology, science, and of course, our planet. So I work at the Stanford D School, where we partner with communities all across the world, and we support communities to build their creative confidence and use design really as a medium for creative problem solving. And at the D School, there we go. At the D School, I lead our emerging tech initiatives. And this work really opens the door for Stanford students, but really also the public, to really engage directly in designing and building emerging technologies like AI, with really keeping that focus on the ethical implications of that work for communities and the natural world, as Sue mentioned. And really at our core, like our mission is, how do we make emerging technologies accessible? How do we equip people to critically evaluate them? And how do we empower to be able to just consume with them? And so in my work at Stanford and as a National Geographic Explorer, one thing I've been thinking a lot about is, how do we move young people and the public more broadly from being consumers of AI to really being its designers and shapers? And this question really keeps me up at night, because I think, as many of us know, our AI infrastructure is being built by a very sort of small, remarkable group of people. And the decisions that they're making, right, about how AI works, who it serves, what it values, it's going to shape society and our planet, right, for generations. We're seeing, the way that different minerals are being mined for this technology, the way that data centers are consuming a lot of energy and electricity in our communities. This technology is very resource intensive, and it's being controlled by a very small group of people who don't necessarily have the best incentives. And on top of that, these systems are built on a lot of data that doesn't reflect, right, the breadth of our lived experiences, our cultures, our perspectives, which has real consequences that I want to explore through a really short exercise. So when we think about data, right, most of us think about data as information, as facts, as statistics, right? It seems pretty straightforward. But actually, data is information that communicates stories. Stories that are built in beliefs, values, and perspectives. And so I just want to give an example. Most of us have some kind of annual health checkup where we go to the doctor, right? And when I see my doctor every year for that annual health checkup, they usually will take my weight, my height, my blood pressure. They'll check my pulse. They'll do an eye and ear exam. That collection of data provides them with enough information that tells an overall story or a narrative about my health. How many people is this aligned with kind of when you go to, okay, right? This is the dominant narrative, right? But there are other types of information, right, that are not part of my annual health checkup, that are left out. What are those things? And they might look different for everyone here, right? Because we all think about health differently. When we think about health, right, it may vary by culture, by geography. But some of the things that I would say for me that are not included are data like stress, anxiety, changes in mood, right? Which are all related to mental health, which has historically been stigmatized in the United States and different parts of the world. And that can tell a very different story about our health than the sort of other pieces of data I shared earlier. So data really communicates stories that are dominant. We've increasingly seen that these AI systems which are being built today, they're built on mountains of data that are projecting stories that are hurting our communities. An example is studies have consistently shown, even just last year, that generative AI models, often when they're prompted around beauty, what they produce are images of women that overwhelmingly reinforce Eurocentric ideas of beauty, right? Light skin, straight hair, this is predominantly what we see. And these tools are trained on billions of images scraped from the internet, which already contain deeply ingrained societal biases, right? And really focused on Eurocentric standards, whether that's in advertising or movies and media. And when we learn about these cases, right, when they pop up in the media and the news, they're often dismissed as glitches. Sometimes even biased algorithms and biased data sets are conflated with technical errors or glitches. And this is based on the research of Dr. Sophia Noble at UCLA. But these technologies, these are not glitches, right? They mirror and represent real-world structural inequities in our world. And so when they're built, we need to consistently be thinking and asking, where has this data been collected? Who labeled that data and how, right? What's their worldview? What's their positionality, right? What was the social and historical context of when that data was collected, right? What was happening in the world? Who is represented and not represented? And for those of us who are working in the data science and technology communities, how can we be responsible stewards of those data stories? Because as many of us know, technology and the data that's powering it, it's just like any other type of media, right? It's biased, it's not neutral. And it represents human prejudices, particularly of dominant groups. So how do we prepare the next generation to help build a future with this technology, because it's not going anywhere, right? That really works for everyone, that allows everyone to be seen, to be heard, to flourish. Because without that right grounding, again, what really worries me is that students kind of fall into one of two pathways. They either become the designers, the minority who create those very harmful systems, or they become the majority, right? Users who are harmed by the technologies and don't feel empowered to question them. And so if we don't really start to tackle this issue, particularly in the world of education, which is where I sit, a lot of the sort of programming around education and AI is around just using the tools. It's not really thinking about them critically and then positioning young people to be those designers of the future. But I really think it starts with us, right? Like, we are here to help young people build this better future, because it's not a technological problem, it's a human problem. And so a couple of things that I think are really important in this work is the next generation really needs to be equipped with an education that prioritizes history, and history that's based in fact, right? So we need to take an approach to education that is really interdisciplinary when we talk about technology, that's grounded in the social sciences like sociology and history. Because again, our technology is just a mirror of our society, right? And the structural inequities, and it actually can amplify that. So it's very dangerous. So it's really crucial for us to support students to understand, right, how bias is embedded in code, in data, and policy, and other facets of the technology. And prioritizing, for example, racial and gender literacy is critical, because that means we have to acknowledge that our technologies are grounded in white supremacy, sexism, ableism, right? And we have to collectively recognize that tech has not been neutral, and it has the power to harm, and it has been harming. And so we have to take a different trajectory. Second, I would say is, and this is for everyone, we really need the ability to support our students learn how do we reflect on our own biases, on our own positionalities in the world, right? Shaped by our identity and our social status, right? That influences the technology that we design and we put out into the world, right? So that involves asking questions like, am I creating this technology based on my own lived experience and then expecting other people to use it? Who benefits from the technology that I'm designing? Who could potentially be harmed or left out, right? What stories is this technology and the data that I'm using telling, right? Who is being left out? So these are the kind of questions that I think are really important to, in terms of our educational approach that we have to support students be able to ask. And then I'd also say it's really important to support students practice engaging with multiple perspectives and ways of knowing and being in the world. And this is based partly in the work and the research of anthropologist Arturo Escobar, who calls this the pluriverse. An example is how we might think about trees. In Western contexts, we might think of trees as a resource for firewood or paper. But in New Zealand, the Maori think of trees as gods of the forest, sacred and to be protected. So which perspective is right? Which perspective is more represented, right? Dominant perspective. That's what we have to really start to challenge. And the last thing I'll say about what I think is really important in terms of what we ground our technology education in is we need to support students be able to act and prioritize implications as a crucial skill set. So this is a framework that we use at the D School around the ways in which the design of technologies, whether it's at the tech level, at the product level, at the data level, at the policy level, there are different implications that we have to prototype and think with, right, before we actually put something into the world that could potentially cause harm. And if we're actively supporting students to practice this muscle, I think that would help them to be really thoughtful designers in terms of the next generation of technology. And so overall, it's like I really believe deeply that we can't just give young people a technical skill. We really have to support them to develop a point of view that's grounded in a real value system. And so, that being said, I wanted to share a little bit about how I'm thinking about this and my approach in K-12 education specifically. So I got funding from the National Geographic Society to develop this kit.
The older amongst us who might have like hardened pathways of thinking, and our prefrontal cortexes are not necessarily fixed, but a little bit more developed. What tools have you seen be really effective for people who maybe learned in a particular way, maybe a more traditional and standard way, to like reopen up their neural pathways to think more creatively about data? Or is Fabelin, is this for the kid in all of us?
Yeah, I love that. This was actually really designed for families because in my work generally over my career, I've noticed that children really take to tech pretty quickly. It's often their parents or caregivers who are trying to catch up and understand what's happening. And so this was designed in a way to really be more of a family-based tool. I didn't present some of the other projects I'm working on, but there are other things I'm working on that specifically target adult learners. But I would say that this is honestly something that can be shared between adults and young people, but it was specifically designed for younger people.
Thank you so much. Not a question, but just want to say congratulations on getting funding.
Oh, thank you.
It's rough out here. So good job.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. And we have time for maybe one more question. All right, let's thank RM again.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. All right. Do we have Raquel in the room? So I guess I'm just going to stand here so she can get set up. So the format of this event is intentionally a bit unique, and I'll explain a little bit more. We have guests representing organizations that the Critical Ecology Lab basically has a crush on. They are invited to introduce some of our speakers and share a little bit about the organizations that they work for. So this is Raquel Crutcher coming from Common Futures, and I will let her take it from here.
Thank you. Very honored that you have a crush on us. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Raquel Crutcher. I'm the Director of Strategy, Advocacy, and Impact at Common Future. We are a San Francisco-based but remote organization whose focus is creating new narratives, changing capital flows, and building power and influence with a focus on Black and Indigenous communities in particular. We are at an interesting point in our organization where we're learning and we're growing as we figure this work out. In particular, we're shifting from an investments-focused strategy to advocacy and policy. So we are sticking to our core principles of community accountability, community ownership, reparative practices, and dignity. We're specifically shifting, I don't think I have the slide. It's okay, I don't need them. Okay. Okay, there we go. We are specifically shifting our initiatives in our programs work, which I am currently leading, to focus on creating and maintaining an equitable economy by ensuring, in the simplest forms, everyone has what they need. Recently, we've pivoted our 3-year strategy to align with the new theory of change, one that centers community wealth building and cooperative economics. And the newest addition is the Legacy Lab, which is my baby. The Legacy Lab is a short program sitting within our broad strategy that proves a single hypothesis if we put our time, our energy, and most importantly, our money in the business part of a larger effort to center cooperative economics. So our inaugural cohort of Legacy Lab housed 10 businesses in 4 predominantly black cities. We were in Memphis, Baltimore, Detroit, and Durham, all of which received 6 months of technical training, one-on-one narrative support, and most importantly, a grant with no restrictions. We believe our community knows what it needs, and we want to ensure that we are not contributing to a culture of restrictive capital. What we learned was simple.
Know that many of the barriers to ownership is the cost of money. So at the 1.5% projected dividend, that allows us to bring land and housing, both residential and commercial, to the market.
All right, thank you.
Just want to say it's amazing to share the stage with so many just inspiring people. I really appreciate that. And yeah, so I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, LCI. So specifically, LCI was established in 1970 as the Office of Planning and Research. You may know it as OPR. We're the state's comprehensive long-range planning organization and work at the intersection of climate, land use, housing, transportation, conservation, public health, economic and ecological sustainability, and equity. We are unique in the policy space and act as more of a think tank that works across all levels of government to help translate policy into direct action that impacts California communities. So we have many programs, including offering technical guidance on general and specific plan updates, CEQA interpretation and implementation, and tribal consultation. We also produce a number of tools and resources, including the newly released Vulnerable Communities platform that supports local resilience planning. And this July, we'll be releasing, as she said before, the 5th Climate Change Assessment, which is one of the largest such reports in the world, synthesizing climate data with original research on California's unique context. We work closely with agency partners, academia, and as well as the federal government on matters of land use and climate. We also have a policy innovation team, which I lead, focusing on elevating unique ideas and stories affecting our state. Here we are also beginning the process of cataloging all of California's social and environmental goals across dozens of agencies that we may orient all our work towards a common goal framework. So one of the things we are responsible for is visioning a positive future for the state of California, one where we tackle the challenges of climate change head on, while also improving the lives of everyday Californians. Right now, we're asking this question of California thought partners and residents, collecting their vision for what California looks and feels like in 2050. What we have heard thus far has led us to these 5 tenets. So I read that all voices are heard, all land, water, fire, and air are stewarded, all regions are resilient, all plans are just, and all communities are regenerative. It is our goal to try to find the state's overarching goals. Okay, we hope to elevate these and other stories in October at an event LCI is co-organizing called the Resilient California Summit. Here we will showcase a number of different state and local programs being completed or kicking off, showing work towards a more livable future for all. We'll be sending out a call for proposals and a call for artists very soon, so if you're interested, please apply. At the conference, we'll be launching a multimedia contest, asking California residents to tell us a vision for their 2050 in California. We will be giving away cash prizes for the top contributors, and we would love it if you would all submit your eco-Afro-futurist ideas of what you think 2050 will bring us. If you're interested, feel free to come and talk to me after this, and I will get your information for our mailing list. Okay. So next, it is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Tiana Paschel. Dr. Paschel is an associate professor in the Department of African American Studies and Sociology at the University of California, Berkeley, where she also earned her doctoral degree. She is co-director of the Black Studies Collaboratory, which brings together artists, activists, locals, and scholars to amplify interdisciplinary, political, and world-building work of Black studies. Her research and teaching focuses on race, inequality, development, and globalization in the Western Hemisphere, with a special interest in how Black communities mobilize to create a better world. She is author of the award-winning book, Becoming Black Political Subjects, which analyzes Black social movements in Colombia and Brazil, and their successful but complex struggle for land rights, affirmative action, and other ethno-racial policies. Her work can be found in the American Journal of Sociology, the Dubois Review, Souls, A Critical Journey of Black Politics, Culture and Society, and Ethnic and Racial Studies, and she is also co-author of Normalizing Inequality, How Californians Make Sense of the Growing Divide with Christina Mora. She is a mom, urban farmer, and a dancer who has practiced, taught, and performed Afro-diasporic dance for decades. So welcome, Dr. Paschel.
Is it afternoon yet? Good afternoon, everyone. So I want to say thank you to the organizers and the visionaries behind this space. I want to thank Suzanne Pierre. I want to thank Stacy King. I want to thank all the people I don't know to thank, because there's so much invisible labor that makes our world possible. And I just want to say, I feel like I'm having this spiritual, emotional reaction to this space, because it feels like this parallel universe, this beautiful parallel universe that I did not know existed. And hopefully as I go on, you'll see why it feels so parallel. So Black feminist scholar Saidiya Hartman once said, "Every generation confronts the task of choosing its past. Inheritances are chosen as much as they are passed on. The past depends less on what happened then and more on the desires and discontents of the present. Strivings and failures shape the stories we tell." So today I want to tell a story that is about our inheritance. I want us to step into a shared inheritance of shared projects of world building across the African diaspora. I want us to think about how the past may already always have the answers for the present that we've been searching for. And specifically in this talk, I want to explore how certain kinds of experiments, radical experiments in world building, can inform how we move. Particularly maroon societies in enslavement, also modern experiments for more sustainable collective living. And so I want to say that in turning to these and in tuning into them, these experiences might hone our own ability to imagine and to create alternatives to the world as we know it. So I'm going to start with some keywords: maroon, quilombo in Portuguese, cimarrón or palenque in Spanish. These are the names of a similar phenomenon of independent societies formed by escaped enslaved Africans in the Americas and also sometimes on the African continent, but I'm gonna focus on the Americas here. So what were and what are these communities? Well, they range from, well, we know there are thousands of them. There were thousands of them in the era of enslavement, and we know that some of them were ephemeral, short-lived experiments in Black liberation, in human liberation. We know that they built worlds and that sometimes those worlds lasted for days and weeks. Sometimes they persisted for as long as they could under the harsh conditions that we see, like in the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia. But we also know that they also ranged in their form to be these great maroon societies, the ones that we see largely in places like South America, Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean. These are entire societies built by people who weren't even considered human, right? These are people who sat across from their oppressors and they negotiated treaties. They even negotiated trade agreements, right? They also had sometimes just self-sustaining communities. Some of these free Black towns or free Black societies lasted for 40 years, over decades, like we see in Yanga in present-day Mexico, or they lasted for up to, like almost 100 years, as we see in one of the longest-lasting quilombos in our history, which is in the case of Palmares in Brazil. So we know that some of these communities were sustaining and had to negotiate the reality of the slaveocracy that continued on despite their existence. And I think that in the popular imaginary in the United States, we often think about, if we think about it all, Maroons, we think about a singular person who kind of heroically escapes and sort of steals themselves away from the slaveocracy, from the terror of it all. But I want us to think about the fact that these were largely collectivist projects. I want us to think about communities and societies built in the woods, in the clearing, as Toni Morrison might say. I want us to think about the world-building part of this work, to kind of think about these as radical experiments in Black liberation. And I also want us to think about the role of Black women in these experiments, particularly the world-building work that Black women did and often still do. The ways that they set up agricultural systems, systems of care, more generally, social reproduction, period, right? The ways that they acted as community archivists and storytellers in these communities, right? They were often the people, as we often are today, in charge of intergenerational transmission, right? Of culture, of know-how, of spiritual weapons and spiritual knowledge. They kept communities whole, and they kept them going, and they were critical to their survival, including, in some cases, being the main kind of liaisons or intermediaries between the slaveocracy and the Maroon communities. What we also know about these societies is that they were incredibly diverse ethnically, right? And they were also diverse in terms of social status. So if we take like one of these communities, Palenque de San Basilio in Colombia and the Caribbean coast, which is one of the earliest Maroon communities in this hemisphere, it actually was an amalgamation of 4 to 5 previous Maroon communities, each of them internally, ethnically diverse. They included people speaking all kinds of languages. They included people, bozales, who were the enslaved Africans who were born in Africa, right? As well as the more acculturated second, third generation, mixed folks, free Blacks and mulattoes, they also enslaved folks as well. And so we might think about these as our early examples of how, that we know what democracy looks like, we know what it is to tend to difference, we know what it is to deal in the mess and the beauty of it all, okay? These were variegated societies. And I want to say that these are societies that are not just in the past. This particular Maroon that I just mentioned, San Basilio, exists still. And it is a community where they still speak a creolized version of a Bantu-based language. And it's a beautiful place. And that's just one of the modern maroon communities that we might find in Latin America and the Caribbean today, where descendants of maroons sometimes hold collective land titles that they fought for, that they died for. This is the case in places like Colombia and Brazil, where I work, but also in places like Ecuador and Honduras. In the context of Brazil, there are an estimated 6,000 contemporary maroon communities, okay? 6,000 quilombos. And even though I think the struggle to get land titles has been a beautiful struggle, only about 250 of them actually have finished the titling process to get those titles. So there's so many more that do not have them. In the context of Colombia, there are about 281 Black communities that have collective land titles, and there are many, many more Indigenous communities that have them. About a quarter of that country is under collective land titles by Indigenous or Afro-descendant communities. And I think that that is critical in a country that, for reasons that we would know, never had a great agrarian reform because of nobody's gonna let that happen. So the biggest agrarian reform happens because Indigenous and Black people together rise up. So in my own research in these communities, I've argued that we need to pay attention to these practices as offering different ways of seeing the world, different ways of seeing the future, different ways of seeing development, right? And different ways of knowing that lead them to more sustainable and reciprocal relationships with land. And in fact, in these communities, especially in the context of Colombia, it's actually even rare to hear people even say the word land to begin with. You're more likely to hear the word territorio, or territory. And by using that word, they're indexing a fundamentally different relationship with commodified land. Instead of Western capitalist notions of nature as separate from man and woman and all people, right? Land as something to be bought and sold, to be commodified. Territory is often seen as a space of life, as about what kinds of life can be sustained in a place. On the Pacific coast of Colombia, areas that are about 60 to 80% Black and Indigenous, there are practices where when a baby is born, you plant the tree or another kind of plant next to the placenta of that baby. And at that point, as it grows, the memory of that person as they exist in the community and even in their death also grows. And so people might walk through a territory, and where I might see a tree, they see their abuela, they see their grandmother, they see their uncle, they see their aunt. And so that practice, one that has survived, is a practice of territoriality. It's one that invokes a very different relationship to the space. And in fact, we might think of territory as about relationships rather than as things. And while these communities give us so much, oh, that was supposed to be up while I was saying all those things about territory, okay. So while these communities give us so much to kind of think about in terms of philosophical resources, world building resources, I think it's also important to kind of think about how they bump up against and kind of push kind of legal frameworks. And so these communities fought to get the right to free, prior, and informed consent, right? A right that's outlined in the International Labor Organization 169 Convention, and was originally set out specifically for Indigenous peoples. I can talk more in the Q&A if you want to know, but Afro-descendant communities throughout Latin America and the Caribbean have been able to also get this right to free, informed, and prior consent as well. And this has been a really interesting kind of negotiation that is guaranteed in constitutions, but constitutions are what they are, right? And so part of my work is looking at the contestation around rights people get them in. But one of the things I want to say is that the most interesting parts about this is just the idea that these communities are the maximum authorities on their territory, and that any corporation, any kind of so-called development project that happens within these communities should not happen without the prior consent of folks in the community. They should be free of manipulation or coercion. They should have all the information that they need, and that information needs to happen prior. People should not step foot in or even dream about developing a place without the consent of the people, right? And so this is the kind of rights framework that communities are working with and often battling around. And I'm happy to talk more in the QA about what this has happened. It's been messy, but I think in the most beautiful of circumstances, it means that before corporation XYZ comes in to mine for gold or platinum, extract oil, build a tourist haven, they instead have to contend with the power, the people power of these communities. And what I think is beautiful about these processes is that instead of communities coming together and saying, do we want X company to come here and do what they do, they often start with collective dreaming instead. What is our collective dream for the future? What does it mean to live well? What is the buen vivir, el buen vivir? What is the good life for our community, for our children, for our grandchildren, for our all the plants in our community, for the cosechas? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What version of the future do we really want to leave for our children and grandchildren and for the planet? So this has been a process that has put a lot of leaders in harm's way. A lot of the leaders who have been fighting for territory and defending territory have also received threats. And despite it all, we see them persisting in these really beautiful practices, right? There are plenty of success stories around the Western Hemisphere that give us lessons on how to think about living and how to think about negotiating. And I think one of the most beautiful concepts that rises out of Afro-descendant communities in Colombia specifically is this idea to live deliciously, vivir sabroso. It's one of those concepts and practices that has us thinking about imagining what a world could be, right? And so I think that it's a kind of refusal to use the terms of the world as we know it, right? And I think that this is an important practice because we know that part of the way that power functions is through what French theorist Michel Foucault called the knowledge power regime, right? This includes guaranteeing that a society cannot even imagine, can't even fathom an alternative, another way of being to the world as it exists right now. We know that part of the functioning of power is to make radical alternatives impossible, literally unthinkable. So when neoliberal reforms, for instance, ripped through the world in the 1980s and continue to, but especially through conservative politicians like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, they infamously said, there is no alternative. They said it so much that it has an acronym, TINA, right? We might call this kind of phenomenon a kind of epistemic violence, because that's what it is. So to say another world is possible, as the World Social Forum folks often did, is to insist that there is indeed another way, another collective future. It is already a radical thing to even just utter, right, that another world is possible. And I think that this is particularly true of Black folks who we be uttering another world is possible. I think imagination has been one of our most beautiful resources, and in my mind, it is absolutely an infinite one, right? If we can think about enslaved people's narratives and the way they imagine freedom from that condition, then surely we can do something. As sociologist Ruha Benjamin says in her newest book, how else could she survive? Could any of us survive without the ability to envision a world? Even if only with the companions we are able to conjure out of the earth, where we are free simply to be. And I want to suggest that we have to do this kind of conjuring and imagining at multiple scales. We tried to do that in October 23. When a grant from the Mellon Foundation, we took nearly 300 Black folks and their families into the woods, into the sacred land in present-day Yosemite National Park. It was short-lived, ephemeral, but like many Maroon communities are. But it's also a space that just had the audacity to exist, had the audacity to be imagined. It was an attempt at world building. What is the world we want to live in? What is the world that we desire? So it was a space for intergenerational learning, of breaking bread. There was lots of music and DJs and dancing. It was a place that included lots of translation from different languages, including Black American Sign Language. We had the Nat Bishop, Tricia Hersey there to lead workshops on radical rest, to think about how we can receive ancestral downloads when we actually have the space to rest our minds and bodies. And I think perhaps most importantly, we had childcare from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. every single day. And our beautiful children were engaging in a parallel program that also was a Black liberation project that included art, learning, and exploring. In short, we build a Maroon society, a quilombo. Can everybody say quilombo with me? Cimarron? Okay, so I introduced these concepts and I'm gonna end. I have 1 more minute, I promise. I wanted to move a little beyond these concepts of just a Maroon or just a quilombo and think more towards marronage as a verb, to think about quilombismo as a verb, to think about cimarronaje as a verb, as many of our philosophers from Beatriz Nascimento to Neil Roberts have told us to do. And so I started with Gordon Parks' beautiful photograph called Boy with the June Bug, and I want to end with June Jordan. Amazing poet, activist, writer, and also a professor in my department before I entered into that department. So she says in her 1978 poem for South African women, "Our own shadows disappear as the feet of thousands by the 10,000s pound the fallowed land into a new dust that, rising like a marvelous pollen, will be fertile, even as the first woman whispering imagination to the trees around her made for righteous fruit. From such deliberate defense of life as no other still claim inferior to any other. The whispers, too, they intimate to the inmost ear of every spirit now aroused, they carousing in ferocious affirmation of all peaceable and loving amplitude, sound a certainly unbounded heat from a baptismal smoke, where yes, there will be fire. And the babies cease alarm as mothers raise arms, and heart high as the stars so far unseen, nevertheless hurl into the universe a moving force, irreversible as light years traveling to the open eye. And who will join the standing up? And the ones who stood without sweet company will sing and sing back into the mountains, and if necessary, even under the sea. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Thank you.
So we have a few more minutes I just need to pause. I'm like still integrating. That was an exceptional talk. And I think that poetry was a very wonderful way to end our plenary session, the speakers that we had this morning. We have time for questions, but can we just speakers one more time? Just take them together. Taking them in together is a whole separate thing, and I think that needs its own time. And I'm just like emotional thinking about it. But does anyone have a question to start us off? All right, so I see some in the back, and I'll come over to you after.
Thank you so much. This was an amazing presentation. Something that was coming to mind for me as you were talking about the rights frameworks being used in quilombos and cimarrones was the rights of nature movements that are happening in a lot of the same places. And in the way that you were talking about it, and the way that I understand rights of nature, these things feel so synergistic, but I don't often hear them talked about together. Like, it feels siloed. And so I'm just curious in your work if you've seen those spaces interacting, and like, if so, how? And yeah, if you could just speak to the different ways rights frameworks are employed between those two movements, and where there could be more synergy.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, part of, I was actually even thinking that, there's an acronym with the free, informed, and prior consent. That's an English acronym, and I'm thinking a lot about translation too. What I will say is that I think the movements that I study, the Black movements especially, in the places that I talked about, but the Indigenous movements, like, foundationally, refuse the kind of Cartesian split, right? They refuse altogether the idea that there are humans and then there is nature, right? And so kind of inherently to these struggles, they are always already both, right? And so I think there's synergy in taking, when you say what is good living, and you don't only center the human, right? That is just kind of baked into the ways that they see the world. And I think there are synergies, but I think that there are sometimes conflict. And I should say, I don't know everything about the rights to nature movements, but I will say in Latin America and the Caribbean, it was a tenuous but very important kind of alliance building that happened through environmental rights organizations and Indigenous and Black movements. But there were always these erasures and moments, right, to kind of think about sometimes rights of nature without thinking about the people in these spaces. There's literally a concept legally in Colombia that referred to these areas as tierras baldías, as empty lands, and environmental justice folks came in and it's we have to protect they would repeat this idea of empty lands in a way that erased the present, right, of these folks. And so I think that there's a lot of synergy, but I wonder where the tensions are too, and to kind of think about what if we start from their conception of the world. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I have a question about the collective land title aspect that you mentioned. I'm just curious to what extent has there been a tendency towards maybe a push for shifts towards kind of private ownership or commodification, or breaking down collectively held titles into individual plots with sort of national development sort of trajectories in these countries. I'm just wondering if there was anything maybe similar to the Dawes Act or something like that in the U.S. and what that may have looked like, or why has it have collectively held lands been able to persist in spite of kind of commodification?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Noni about this before. It's collectivist projects are messy, period. They're also messy in a world that is against that kind of way of formulating society. And so it's on the ground messy. I will say that these collective lands are usually democratically governed by something called consejos comunitarios, or community councils. And at that level, legally and in practice, these are these are territories that cannot be bought and sold, period. There's no individual plot to be bought and sold. That does not stop mining corporations from coming in and trying to buy off individual people, right? And then and sometimes with the threat of violence, paramilitaries, right? And then in cahoots with the government that will, has historically been giving out mining licenses that were against their own constitution. But these are not, in principle, places that can be bought and sold. And when it goes through all the legal action in the Colombian context, the Constitutional Court always sides with the communities because it is the Constitution. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that really beautiful presentation. I had a question. You were talking or describing a difference, like a heavier presence of these quilombos, of these maroonage sites in Latin America and the Caribbean as opposed to in the US. I was wondering if you could explain some of the social or material differences in these contexts.
Yeah. There's so much, that is such a beautiful question. It's a hard to answer. I will say that the practices of the slaveocracies in these countries were different. It's also true that the kinds of where wealth came from was different. So when I think about some of the biggest quilombos, it didn't happen close to the plantation economies. Actually, it happened in where mining was big. So if you look at Yanga in Mexico, is gold mining and other kinds of mining. Even Palmares too, right? So these are places that, their urban slavery is huge also in these countries, and manumission is a big deal. You have more ways to buy yourself into freedom in Latin America, the Caribbean, in their legal structures because of just how society was working. And what that meant is that you had just more free Afro-descendant folks, and they, not always, but sometimes were involved in collectivist dreaming projects with Maroon communities, right? And so I think those are some differences. Also, the Spanish and Portuguese didn't have the same ability to divide ethnic African ethnic groups in the same way that the Anglophone Caribbean and the United States did. And so what would happen, because slavery was bigger, 95% of enslaved Africans went to Latin America and the Caribbean, it was bigger and it was later. And so it meant that it would be like an empire falls in West Africa, and then they have a lot of Yoruba people that they've kidnapped and are enslaved, and they don't divide them on different plantations. They speak Yoruba when they resist. Full societies that were like one generation, if not born in Africa, that among the Maroons in this place. Yeah.
All right, let's thank Dr. Peschel again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And she'll be around for the rest of the day, and her contact information is here, so please feel free to contact her. All right, so maybe I should stand up where I'm supposed to. All right, so you've heard from our 3 speakers for the day, covering the themes of tech and AI, democracy, and, gosh, what was the other one? And cooperative economics. I'm sorry, it's been a time. I don't need 2 microphones. So what we're going I'm like, hello, can you hear me? Oh, it's fine, I'm fine. So the rest of the day is to help us integrate. And so what we're gonna do now, we're running a little bit behind schedule. That doesn't faze me, for better or worse. And so what that means now is we're gonna take about 30 minutes, and what we have for you outside in the breezeway is catering. We have lunches prepared that are gonna be given at cost. So the same price that we've paid, we're gonna pass that along to you. They are chicken and vegan Nigerian plates from Man Must Walk here in Oakland. And that is going to be a time where you can revitalize yourself, get some beverages, get a coffee from Mother Tongue. And then we're going to transition to our workshops. You should be up for workshops. If you're not, see one of our volunteers. They're wearing like a colored sticker, and they're walking around. You can see me as well. And then we're going to have a closing session, so I really encourage you to stay to the end if you have the ability. because we're going to have kind of a debrief and integration session. We're going to hear a poetry reading, original poetry by Ashia S. Ajani, who's an Oakland-based poet and eco-griot. And then we are going to close with a non-alcoholic toast. And so I hope that you can all be there to kind of wrap up the day and really hold it all together collectively. All right, so I'm going to say let's adjourn for now and head out, get a beverage, and get some lunch, and then we'll go from there. Thank you, everyone.